Hello, I'm Rita from creativepursuitsetc.com. I have a website plus a YouTube channel, and I'm inviting you to join me for a absolutely beginner quilt. But if you already quilt, it'll be easy to do for you also. But it's going to be a free pattern that you can download. It'll be on the channel or on to download in a couple of days. But basically, it's going to be this pattern here. It's going to have some strips, some 4 patches. This one has applique, and I'm not going to do the applique on the first video. I'm going to just use a focus fabric instead. So I'm going to instead, because it's a beginning pattern, and want to make it easy, I'm going to put this in the middle. I'm going to put it at the top and at the bottom, because this is a fun little fabric. I have a new little grandson named Trevor, and so this is for him. So I'm going to show you today how to do the strips. And if you've never quilted before, then this will be a absolutely basic beginning part of quilting, cutting it and sewing it together, pressing it, and then putting them together and just laying them aside. Because in the end, when we get the pieces made, it will turn into a quilt as you go project. So we'll quilt it along with you, and so that you don't have to have it professionally quilted. You don't have to worry about it if you don't have quilting free motion experience. It'll be so easy. So join me and I'll get set up here to show you how to cut the strips first. And what you're going to need, if you don't have the pattern, you don't have to wait to get started. I would buy a focus fabric, some of whatever theme you like, because it's going to be so fun to pick it out according to who you're making it for and the colors that you want. So you need 2/3 of a yard in order to put it in the middle and at the top and the bottom, so it'll be your focus fabric. Okay, so to get started, the first thing you want to do is pick out your focus fabric. So when you've got this, 2/3 of a yard, you will be able to pick out some colors of fabric that you like. The fastest way to make this is to buy like 1/8 of a yard of just 45 inch fabric and just cut strips like this. And I'm going to show you how to do that. Sometimes they come pre-cut, and you can just buy a coordinated pack, and you will need 6 different colors if you want to do just barely 6. It'll make the whole 2 bars, the top and the bottom. But I want to mix in some of my shorter pieces because I have some leftovers. And as long as it's 6.5 or more inches long, you can cut it 2.5 inches wide, and you can use these too. It's just a little bit more piecing to make them go in there. But since I already have some of these fabrics, I'm going to go ahead and use some strips because it goes really fast, and some of my leftovers. Okay, so we're going to get started, and if you haven't done so already, please go to the website, creativepursuitsetc.com, and if you would like to subscribe to the channel, then you won't miss any parts, and you can click like. We appreciate that if you do. So the first thing we're going to do to get started is get some strips ready. And I have some long strips, which are the whole width of the fabric, and I have some short ones that I'm going to piece. But we're going to start with how to cut the strips, because some people have not taken a quilting 101 class, and if you haven't, it's good to know some of the tricks to keep, when you're working with a rotary cutter, it's nice to know the tricks to be safe. So let me put these strips down, and I'm going to show you how I have a piece of a fabric, and this is just off of the bolt. This is a 45 inch wide piece, and it's folded in half with the crease, and if I opened it up, you would see that it's just a whole strip of fabric. This is probably about 1/4 of a yard. For these strips, the minimum that you need is you're going to have 36 little bars that are 2.5 inches by 6.5 inches. So if you cut strips like this, you can get 6 out of each one, 6.5 inches wide. So the minimum you need is going to be 6 different colors of fabric. And if you bought 1/8 of the yard, I think that's the smallest that they'll sell it to you, because you only need 2.5 inches, but it's going to come, 1/8 of the yard is a 4.5 inch strip. So you'll have a little bit left over. Or if you like to, you can ask for 6 inches, and then you can cut 2, so that'll make 5, and you'll have a little bit to trim. Okay, so you can see that I have a piece of fabric here that came off of a bolt. It was like probably 44 to 45 inches wide, and this is the crease that comes on the bolt. When you get it, it's usually folded up like this, because they don't want to have it like, they want the half boards, so it's like this on the board. So here's the fold right up here. It has a crease in it, and that's okay. And then what I'm going to do is I'll show you that this is the selvage ends right here, and we don't like to include the selvage ends in quilting because they don't wash as the same as the cotton does. It might mess it up, might shrink differently or something. So we're not going to use that. But for these strips, I'm going to go ahead and leave it on because I'm going to trim them anyway. So I'm just going to sew them that way. But the basics of cutting are to take your piece of fabric and it's folded like this, and I'm going to fold it again so that it's shorter. Otherwise, I could stretch it out like this and use my ruler and cut the whole long piece, which is probably 22 inches wide right now. But if I fold it again up there, I still have a fold right here by me, and I've matched up this fold that was on the bolt up to the selvage edges, and now I have a more manageable side. This is only 10 inches or 11 inches, something like that. So for the first cut, what you want to do, it's going to be raggedy, so I want to trim off the first little bit from the edge so I make sure that I have a perfectly straight edge. So I will use my mat to line up the bottom, one of my lines, and make sure that it hangs over just a little bit so that I can trim off that first piece. And I'm making sure underneath that all of them overlap that so that I don't have to, at the ends, have some that are shorter than the other. So I'm gonna put my glasses on, make sure I cut accurately, and I'm lining up my ruler with the line, and this is the part that I'm going to just discard. I'm going to cut that off because I want a perfectly straight edge, and you can go like that. So the part about cutting, and you have a rotary cutter, this one has a safety button, and you can do that, and when you don't have it in use, please lock it so that it doesn't get, you know, accidentally picked up, because these blades are really sharp, and so you don't ever want to leave it unlocked. And don't leave it where anybody small can get a hold of it. So I got it open now, and the trick about cutting a nice straight line is you want to put pressure right where you're cutting. So in order to do that, you can start cutting here, and I have a finger here that stabilizes where I'm pushing, and you want to just have a little bit at a time and walk your fingers down. Keep walking. My blade is not very sharp. I probably have to do it again. I need to get a new blade. But now I have a perfectly straight edge right here. I've lined it up right here on the bottom with the lines on the mat. Now I've got the lines that were going vertically cut. Now what you want to do is flip it over, exactly over. Because now we're not so focused on the lines on the mat, we're going to be using our ruler because it'll be much more accurate cutting. So now I'm going to see on my ruler, I've got a 1/2 inch on this side, I've got a 1 inch on this side. So if I lay it on this side of my ruler, and you can use this side, you just have to find the 1/2 inch mark. It's just a little harder to see. So my ruler is a Creative Grids ruler, and they make them so that there's 1/2 inch on one side and a 1 inch on the other side. It makes it a little bit more versatile. So I'm going to lay now my ruler. So I found my line right here. Here's the 1/2 inch, another inch there. So there's 2.5 inches. So I'm going to use my ruler on my perfectly straight line now to cut my first strip. And you can see that down here on this horizontal way, I've got another line that I can use on the bottom of that fold. So now I'm going to cut my first strip. That's 2.5 inches. I'm going to start with my pressure with my fingers right here. And you always want to cut away from you, not toward you. I even saw a video once where somebody was cutting toward, and I think, oh, I was always told not to do that because I think it's more a little safer to do it this way. Okay, so my blade is still dull. Okay, all right, so now we have a long strip that is 2.5 inches wide by the width of the fabric. And when I make my patterns, I put WOF, that's width of fabric, but I put that in the instructions too, because sometimes it's just easier to take the whole strip than to try to cut it up in sixes, because a lot more sewing if you have to cut them in the 6.5 inches pieces first before you strip them together. So I'm gonna sit down and show you. This is scrap. You can save it if you want, or you can get rid of it. Now I'm going to show you how to. These are all long strips that I cut for this quilt. So I'm just going to randomly pick up one or the other and sew them together. I think I'll start with this one. I like this blue. Okay, so you can see that I have an edge right here that has the white on it. Sometimes they're not white, but that's the selvage. And you don't want to use that when you're sewing, but because I'm going to trim this, I'm just going to leave it on, because even the orange right here has a selvage edge. It's like narrower, but you can see it. So I'm just going to match it up right sides together. And I'm going to take a pin and pin it. And you don't want to run over your pins, but sometimes just to get it started, I put it there. Also, I have a little piece somewhere. Let me show you a trick. This is one of my scraps, so you can see that I've used it for something else, but I'm not going to have a whole long strip the width of the fabric. I'm just going to have to make these smaller pieces. I will do some 6.5-inch strips that'll cut into to use the smaller pieces up. But if you will use, it's almost like a caboose and a train. If you will cut off a couple pieces, then when you start, my machine likes to get cut up at the very beginning, and I don't know if everybody's does. There, I just locked my rotary cutter, but it makes a lot less trouble to start out with the engine and a caboose at the very end because it's ready to go again. So I'm going to show you how to just do the 1/4-inch seam, and my machine has a 1/4-inch foot on it, but you can also use like tape or something to measure and mark on your sewing machine so that you get a perfectly 1/4-inch seam. So if you don't have a 1/4-inch foot, my foot when I sew makes a 1/4-inch seam. Okay, so before I start to sew this, I want to show you that I have my right sides of the fabric together. You can see the orange is duller on this side, and I've got the selvages left on because I'm going to trim them later. Those are the wrong sides, so I'm going to sew that. You can pin this all the way down if you want to, but I just sort of stop and hold it with my fingers. And I put the engine on here. That's just a scrap piece that I want to so that it sews on that and goes right into the fabric, rather than if you start on the very edge, sometimes it starts to jung up a little bit there and makes a mess and you get frustrated. So I'm just going to start sewing this strip. And you can go slow or fast, whatever you like, what speed you like. In mine, I'm just running the edge of the foot right along the edge of the fabric. And every once in a while I stop to line up to make sure my edges are met together so they're not overlapped. And it's really easy to do, not hard at all. So you ran into my little last piece right there. That's so that it can start, and it ran a little bit off, but it helps me when I start the other side. So now you see that I had a 1/4-inch foot on there. If I didn't, I'd have to have that tape to mark, because when 1/4-inch seams, if you have some that are bigger and some that are smaller, when you go to put it together, it's not going to fit together very nicely. It's going to have some gaps or pleats and overlaps. But you can see that this strip is sewn together, have a 1/4-inch seam like that, and then I'm going to press it. Now, it's important when you're doing quilting that you're not ironing, you're just pressing. So I've got a little pressing board right here. Yeah, and it's hot still. So with these bars, and some quilts you have to press in a certain direction, but with this one it doesn't matter. So I'm just going to press to one side or the other, and usually if I have a light fabric like this one, I will press to the darker side so that the seam doesn't show. It'll be hidden underneath the darker one. So the first thing you want to do is set your seam. And to set your seam, you don't want to iron like this, because what you want to try not to do is not stretch your fabric. It's cotton, 100% cotton, and especially if you put like water on it or something, it's easy to stretch it, especially if you're giving it a lot of tug. But if you press it just like this, what it does is it relaxes the thread and it puts it like into the fiber more, so the fabric more, so that it's relaxed. And you just move it along. Don't do that, just move it like that. I'm not very concerned about these right here. I mean, I might put a little water on them later, but I'll make sure that I don't stretch it. I'll just press it all the way down that seam like that. Now I'm gonna go ahead and press to the dark side of this one. So if I open this up, and let's see, I'm gonna press it here. If I open it this way, you see where the seam is going to be pressed on this side toward the dark. And that'll just be a good habit to be in. And it's the same when you're doing the sides. I don't think I can do stuff standing up. One of those things. And you really don't have to press in between each one of these strips that you attach. You could attach 6 of them together and then press them all at the same time. But for the video, I'm going to show you how I'm just pressing these over to the side. And now if you turn over, you can see how that seam is going toward the dark color. Darker color. Except for I think right there it didn't, so I'm going to fix that. And you can kind of feel with your finger to make sure it's going to the right direction. And again, I'm not going to stretch it out, I'm just going to press it all the way down. And the reason this quilt goes together really fast is because these strips, once you get them stripped, you're going to cut them into pieces and they're already sewn together. So just roll it over and just press it. Then you will notice that at the end, one of these pieces of fabric, the darker one, the blue, was longer. You can see that there's a selvage edge up here and an extra hanging over. So I'll just trim off that little extra piece. I'll just trim it even with the selvage that's on there so that they're the same size. All right. So now, when I sew the next strip on, what you want to do is I started with these two. So I started at this end, and what I want to do is just flip it around to this end. When you do a lot of strips together, if you sew them all from the same side in a row, then sometimes they have a tendency to wave a little bit. So the easiest way to keep that from happening is, well, if you start with this side up, flip it around, and attach the next one to the side over here. And I think I'll start with undo the white. And I would put a pin like that. And I would do my little, I've still got my little engine right there, which is such a great little tip to keep your machine from getting the threads all caught up. This white also, I'm going to show you, is kind of, yeah, I got it backwards. It's kind of hard to tell, but it's a white on white. So you can kind of, if you look close, you can see that it's got a little bit more pattern on this side. This side is a duller. This is the back side. So sometimes I check that when I'm doing white on white. It doesn't matter though. You can sew on either side of the fabric facing up. Sometimes then when I've done an artsy quilt, I will use the back side of the fabric because I want a lighter tone. And you can use either side you want, but I do want this little pattern to show up a little bit. So I'm gonna put that down. So I've got my little engine right here so that when I start sewing, it goes right on. See now, it did try to stop a little bit on me like that. That's what that is to prevent, so maybe didn't have it caught quite in there. And then I'm gonna sew again with my foot on the edge, which makes my seam be 1/4 inch. This is the tail that I'll cut off at the end and use it again for the bottom the next time. End with that piece still stuck in there, so I'm ready to go again the next row. So I'm going to show you on this one. Cut off my little tail, don't need that. I'm going to start by just pressing a little bit so that I can show you how to subcut these. When you subcut it is when I'm going to be doing the 6.5 inches strips so that they'll be ready to put into the quilt. But I do that after I've kind of got these all sewn, or at least sections to sew. You could go and continue sewing. If you bought the long pieces and had 6, you could just keep sewing. You know, I'd flip it to the other end, sew from this end, and then flip it again, and pretty soon I would have 18 strips go all the way across there. But I wouldn't want to sew all 18, and that'd be too many to do. But I would sew probably 6 or so at a time, and then I would stop and subcut. But because of the video, I hate to make you be watching paint dry, as they say. I will press this bar and I'll show you how to strip them, subcut them so that you're ready to sew them together. So Going to again press, and you can tell that this one is white. So if I do this, press it this way, I'm going to get the seam underneath the white, which is going to make a dark shadowy area. So I'm going to make sure that my seam goes toward the blue. So you can kind of do that with your finger to make sure that it's going the right direction that you want. I think I'm pressing the wrong side because it seems like I'm backwards for my from my being right-handed. Thinking about the camera, and I wanted to do this beginning 101 quilting because when I first started quilting years ago, I took a class. It was at a quilt shop, and it was just basic quilting, and we did learn all these little techniques, and it sure helped to have somebody showing you some of the shortcuts, some of the things to, you know, like piecing things. You can do chain piecing, which speeds things up. But some of the little things, the little tricks are so nice to know, and how to press and make it ready to go. So now I've got these 3 strips pressed, and if I wasn't doing this for the camera, I probably wouldn't cut these yet. I'd probably add at least 3 more before I would cut, but I'm going to show you how to do it so that you'll know. So here's the piece right here, and you can tell that my selvage edge are still there, so I'm going to cut those off. I'm going to leave it here, make sure that I'm going to go on the line on my mat, and I'm also lining up the line going this way on my mat. I'm going to make sure that the selvages all hang over, and I'm going to use my ruler on the edge of the strip and line up as best I can to get a nice first cut. And there's your scrap. Now this ruler happens to be 6.5 inches wide, which is so convenient. So I'm going to flip this over this way so that I can cut some segments now. These are going to be 6.5 inch by the 2.5 inch widths that are sewn together. 3 pieces so far. And these are short little pieces, so you don't really have to walk your fingers like you do with these longer strips, but you just want to give a nice little pressure there. Okay, now if I had all of these ready to go, all my strips, so that I'm going to have 36 bars, 18 are for top up there and 18 over this, I would begin to sew them together. This is not enough colors. I'm going to put my yellows and my blues and greens in there, but to sew these together, I would just do this and sew the quadrant seam there. When I have 18 pieces across for the top and 18 for the bottom, then I'm all ready to go to the next step. So the next video will be about making a 4-patch. So 2 different colors. So that's it for today's tutorial, but I would like to show you this one more time. If you're going to make this quilt, remember that the pattern will be free. It'll be on the website in a day or two, www.creatorpursuits.etc.com. I think Creator Pursuits was already taken, so it says etc. on the top, on the bottom of it, an extra at the end of it. So get your 2/3 of a yard for your focus fabric for this section in the middle, the top and the bottom. If you want to make an applique, I'm going to have appliques available on the website, and I'm probably going to make a dozen or more of them. Here's one that has dinosaurs, the same quilt pattern with a dinosaur theme. I have 2 grandsons that are dinosaur crazy, so this has got nice bright colors and dinosaurs, and this will be a different technique. So this will be a separate video when you're doing applique, because there's many ways to do applique, and I'd like to try them all because they're really, all of them are fun. So thank you for joining me. Hope this will help you get a new hobby, maybe, or just if you are an experienced quilter, make a fast baby quilt to share with one of your special people. Also, if you wanted to make this a twin size quilt, you would just have to add extended fabric. So you could see how this is easy to make into a twin. You probably want to make it like 50 or 60 inches wide instead of 36 inches wide, which is what this will be. Okay, well, thank you for joining, and we'll see you next time. Thank you.